Alrighty, folks, so we are here to review Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power. The first couple of episodes are out. I'm going to give you my take on all of that. Plus, I kind of want to talk about the gap between Tolkien's vision of the world and the Hollywood writers. Because you see, Tolkien was a Christian and believed in Judeo-Christian values and Western civilization. I'm not sure the writers of this series do, and I think it shows. It's all that in just a second. This video is sponsored by Good Ranchers. Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power. So I don't know why they're doing this in the first place. The original series is amazing. You take it as one movie. That is my favorite series of films. The TV show from Amazon costs somewhere between $750 million and $1 billion. And let us just say it is not as good as the original, at least so far as we can see right now. I'm not saying it's the worst thing I've ever seen. All I'm saying is why. I want to begin from the beginning. The original Lord of the Rings is a masterpiece. And it starts as a masterpiece. The opener is a prologue. If you go back to the original Lord of the Rings, the original prologue is really well written. It is Galadriel in a voiceover telling you the entire story of what leads up to Frodo Baggins finding the ring at Bilbo's house. And it gives you the entire story, and it does it in about 6 minutes. Here's a little bit of a taste of that so you can hear what a good prologue sounds like.
It began with the forging of the great rings. 3 were given to the elves, immortal, wisest, and fairest of all beings. 7 to the dwarf lords, great miners and craftsmen of the mountain halls. And 9 rings were gifted to the race of men, who above all else desire power. The Dark Lord Sauron forged in secret a master ring to control all others, and into this ring he poured his cruelty, his malice, and his will to dominate all life. One ring to rule them all.
Okay, so in the first few minutes of the films, you have the entire moral battle set up. Everything is laid out in chronological fashion. In the original prologue, you have the good guys, you have the bad guys, and you have the great temptation. Because obviously, this prologue ends with Isildur not actually giving up the ring and throwing it into the fire, instead taking it. And that, of course, leads to all the events of the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Okay, that's what a good prologue sounds like. But most of all, you have all the messages, right? You have all the themes laid out in the first 5 minutes of what will be like a 9-hour trilogy. You have all the sort of major races that have been introduced. You have the bad guy who's been introduced. Right after this, of course, you get this incredible battle scene where Sauron is just blowing people out of the water with his mace. He's just destroying people. Now, by contrast, I bring you the Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power prologue. And again, we're going to start from the beginning here. So the way the prologue is told is really confusing. She starts off by saying that, in the olden days, there was light, but there was no sun, something like that, which, okay, sure. And then she explains that there was a dark force, Morgoth, that attacked Valinor, and they had to leave Valinor, and then they went over to Middle Earth, and they had this big battle. And then they say that they kind of vanquished the power, but not really. But then Sauron takes over, but you don't know who Sauron is. And then Sauron's people are all over, and then they think they win, but she's still chasing him down. Like, none of it is chronological. None of it really makes a lot of sense. It's just poorly written. You don't know what the stakes are. You don't really know what makes Sauron and Morgoth bad other than they're dark and they don't like light or something. Then we get to the actual characters. So Galadriel in the original Lord of the Rings is almost this heavenly figure who's in control of enormous power and who has to turn down the power in order to allow for the possibility of a victory over Sauron. And this really creepy scene in the first Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring, where she confronts Frodo and he offers her the ring essentially, and she is very tempted by it. And she talks about, instead of a lord, you will have a dark queen. You remember that whole scene? That's really interesting. I'll tell you what's not so interesting is turning Galadriel into basically Éowyn. She's basically Éowyn, right? She's a person who is embittered by the fact that her brother was killed by Sauron, and she is just running around chasing Sauron. And for some reason, other people don't believe that Sauron is still out there. She's the only one who believes Sauron is still out there. I'm still confused as to why that is, since they're pretty obvious signs that he's still out there. Fine, so you want to change her character? I'm even okay with that. Galadriel is a good fighter, whatever. You have in the original series, Liv Tyler's character who can fight. You have Éowyn who can fight. So the idea of women fighting in the Lord of the Rings universe is not totally crazy. But, the men don't all have to be wildly incompetent. It'd be good if some of these guys knew how to fight. So here is Galadriel fighting, and apparently the men are very bad at fighting. The men are just kind of standing around. Like, I don't even know what that guy's doing. That one is like, I'm just going to hit it with a torch. That one's like, I'm going to stand here with a torch and just get my ass kicked. Okay, he just threw her with a sword. So that's a pretty strong sword. Carries a lot of weight. Okay. And she single-handedly takes on the troll. So this troll is now taking out like 10 elves, but she's taking on single-handedly. All right, again. All right, fair enough. Doesn't bother me that much. I know there's some people who are like freaking out over this and the Mary Sue of it, but you know, she is Galadriel. She's queen of the elves. Fine. It's a change in her character, but I guess she's driven by revenge against Sauron. And so I suppose maybe they're setting it up for, is she driven by the right motivation? But it's not really clear why what she's doing is bad or what the conflict is exactly. We'll get to more on this in just 1 second. First, Americans are worried. Food and gas prices are higher than I've ever seen in my lifetime, which is why I'm grateful for the best meat delivery service in America, Good Ranchers. Good Ranchers is awesome. I know because they actually sent me a kosher steak. And let me tell you, it is one of the best steaks I've ever had in my entire life. While grocery store meat prices continue to rise, Good Ranchers' inflation-proof model locks in your price the day you subscribe for the life of your subscription. Plus, you can pause your subscription for up to 90 days or cancel anytime you want, but you won't want to. Good Rancher ships 100% American meat, born, raised, and harvested in the United States directly to your door. All of their beef is prime or upper choice, the 2 highest grades. Superior steakhouse quality is their stock in trade. Again, Good Ranchers not only supports American agriculture, they are also big fans of the Daily Wire. They share our values. They sponsor all our shows, so go check them out. You'll be helping them, you'll be helping us. Go to goodranchers.com/Ben. Use code Ben at checkout. You'll get $30 off plus free shipping. You can subscribe to lock in your price. Recession-proof your meals for life. That's goodranchers.com/Ben. Use code Ben at checkout. Look, this goes to the biggest problem with the first 2 episodes. Nothing really happens in the first couple of episodes. This is the biggest problem. Like, we know from the prologue that Sauron is still out there and that he's planning some bad stuff. And then we get 2 episodes of pretty much nothing except probably Gandalf shows up. That's it. We are introduced to various species. These species are biracial in nature. Now, there's been a lot made of this, mainly because this feels like Amazon trolling. Okay, so all the species are multiracial now, which is supposed to be, I suppose, a backhanded slap at the original Lord of the Rings series. Like they did something wrong by not making Legolas Hispanic or something. I guess the idea here is we have to diversify. And Amazon made a very big deal out of this, that they were doing a lot of racial casting. There was going to be black elves, and there were going to be black dwarves, and there were going to be Hispanic little people, hobbits, and all the rest of it. And, you know, is it like the end of the world? It doesn't bother me that much. It just feels really unsophisticated and kind of forced. When Game of Thrones, for example, casts multiracial people, it does so in the context of understanding that like people from Dorne are different colored generally than people who are from, say, King's Landing. It's sort of geographic in nature. And so it makes some sense that when you have these races meeting and mixing, that's sort of how the world historically worked, right? Because the races originally were more separate than they are today. You're sort of taking modern multi-ethnic, multiracial living conditions and projecting them backward in time. Obviously, it feels like trolling. So they can yell at their fans and then suggest that the fans are toxic, which is the new game in Hollywood, which is anyone who doesn't like me is toxic fandom. So, I mean, here's just an example of some of the biracial character montage that's happening here.
Look like a badger. Maybe a fox.
More likely a half-foot.
Harfoot.
It also is slightly confusing in terms of some of the family relationships, because you're not really sure who's a parent or an uncle of various people. Among the Harfoots, for example, it's unclear to me. There's one character who's someone online correctly called Female Frodo. I think that there's a character who appears to be black, who is, I think, her mom. I'm not sure, might be an aunt. Like not totally clear. So it sort of makes you ask questions that normally you wouldn't ask, just because, like, why would you? Okay, fine. So put away that sort of hot button issue that people are trolling about. I'm just bewildered by the entire idea of the show. Is Galadriel having to convince everybody that Sauron is out there and the bad guys are here, when a bunch of random crap is happening that's pretty dark? See, in Lord of the Rings, the original Lord of the Rings trilogy, they don't actually show all the bad stuff happening, really, right? Instead, they say that Sauron has gone away and it's kind of mysterious. And the first thing you hear are just rumors, right? Dark rumors. Eventually, that's backed up by the Black Riders arriving. So there's this gradual arrival of the bad guys. Here, it's like full blown. You've got entire cities that are on fire. You have leaves turning black You have wolves that are just randomly hanging out in your briar patches or whatever. Again, there's so much goodwill with the Lord of the Rings franchise. There's so much there that people want to love. You got to give us some characters we actually care about. I literally cannot tell you the name of any character in this show other than the ones I already knew from Lord of the Rings. I can't tell you, and I watched 2 episodes of it. The bottom line of Lord of the Rings, the original Lord of the Rings, the moral core of the story is what matters. What is the moral core of this story? What exactly is being fought over or fought against? Or is it just that Sauron is a big baddie who's kind of dark and scary because he's big and dark and scary? There has to be some sort of moral component underlying. Like every line in the original Lord of the Rings is freighted with that. You have that whole conversation between Gandalf and Frodo in Fellowship. When Frodo is in the mines of Moria with Gandalf and he says, I wish I didn't have to deal with this. I wish none of this had ever happened to me. And Gandalf says, so do I. So do all who live to see such times, but that's not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us. That is a statement of deep Judeo-Christian morality. And I've heard nothing like that in the writing of the show so far. Because the further they stray away from Tolkien and the more they decide to just make a basic fantasy series with none of the original moral components, the more the series feels like it lacks it. So maybe they pick it up. Maybe they fix it. Or maybe the actual divide in the new Lord of the Rings is the divide between a writer who is writing about Judeo-Christian morality and Western civilization and a group of people who are doing the writing now who don't know the first thing about those things. And so they're writing it without any reference to that moral system. They're writing sort of basic Hollywood tropes into an extraordinarily expensive series. Again, I'll give it more time. I'm happy to watch future episodes and see if they are able to pick it up. But I gotta say, when fans say they are underwhelmed, I get it. When Amazon decides to silence all of the critics, because they're really doing this, they're banning people from leaving reviews because so many of the reviews are negative. That is not a sign of Amazon's moral strength. It's a sign of the weakness of the product.